The night Voss showed up at her door, Maren had $43 in her checking account, a bruise the size of a fist on her left ribs, and a pot of instant noodles going cold on the stove. She hadn't called him. She hadn't called anyone. That was the thing about Maren. She didn't call. She handled things herself, filed the numbers, balanced the columns, made the shortfalls disappear on paper, even when they didn't disappear in real life. She was good at making things look better than they were. She'd been doing it since she was 14 years old, standing in a government office with her mother's unpaid electric bills in a manila folder, trying to explain to a bored clerk why the math didn't add up. The math always added up if you knew where to look. She knew where to look. She just hadn't expected Voss to show up at 11:15 on a Tuesday, still in his coat, smelling like winter air and something expensive, while she was sitting on the bathroom floor with a dish towel pressed to the side of her head. She heard the knock. She didn't move. The second knock was hard. Hail, his voice, through the door low. Not loud. It never had to be loud. Maren closed her eyes. The towel was wet now. She pulled it away and looked at it in the dark. She hadn't turned the bathroom light on, just the little night light above the outlet. And the cloth was dark with something she didn't want to think about too much. The third knock didn't come. Instead, she heard the click of a lock. She hadn't given him a key. She had never given anyone a key. The door opened anyway. She had worked for Voss for 2 years and 4 months. Not as a secretary, not as an assistant. She was his numbers person. The one who looked at what his legitimate holdings were actually doing versus what they were supposed to be doing, and explained the difference in a way that didn't make anyone feel stupid. His other accountants handled the surface layer. Maren handled the layer beneath. She wasn't supposed to know what that meant. She'd figured it out in the first 6 weeks. She hadn't quit. She told herself it was because the money was good. It was good. Better than anything she'd found before. Better than 3 part-time jobs stitched together. Better than the temp work she'd done the winter before, when she'd eaten peanut butter out of the jar for 2 weeks straight because she couldn't afford bread. But that wasn't the only reason. She stayed because the work was interesting, because Voss trusted numbers more than people, and Maren had spent her whole life being the kind of person people didn't trust, so she understood him in a way she couldn't explain and didn't try to. He was not a good man. She had never pretended otherwise. But he was consistent. He said what he meant. He didn't smile at you while he was deciding to ruin you. In the world Maren had grown up in, the one of unpaid rent and men who charmed first and disappeared after, that consistency felt like something close to solid ground. She had not expected to need it. Hale. He was in the doorway of the bathroom now. She hadn't heard him come through the apartment, but of course she hadn't. He moved the way expensive things moved. Quietly, without effort. She didn't look up. "I'm fine," she said. "You're on the floor. I sit on the floor sometimes. It's a floor. That's what they're for." He was quiet for a moment. She heard him crouch. That was the thing about Voss. He was a large man, broad through the shoulders, the kind of build that took up a doorway, but he moved with something precise about him, controlled, and then he was at her level, and she couldn't avoid his face anymore. He looked at the towel, then at her. Who did this? It wasn't a question. It was the way he talked, declarative statements dressed up as questions. Who did this? Where are they now? What did you touch? "I tripped," she said. "You tripped into what?" "A door," she met his eyes. "My door. I tripped into my own door. It was dark. I'm clumsy." "It's not a crime." Something moved across his expression. Not disbelief exactly. Something more contained than that. Like he was filing the lie away for later. "Your lease says you live alone," he said. "I do live alone. Your neighbor called the building manager. The building manager called my office." She stared at him. "Why does your office have my building manager's number?" Voss didn't answer. He reached out and, with a steadiness that surprised her, moved the towel aside. She let him. She didn't know why she let him. Maybe because she was tired. Maybe because the room had started tilting about 20 minutes ago, and she hadn't wanted to admit it. He looked at the cut for a long moment. His jaw was set. The line of it was very clean in the low light. She'd noticed that about him before. in conference rooms and across tables piled with files, the particular sharpness of his face. It was the kind of face that didn't give anything away by accident. Right now it was giving something away. "This needs stitches," he said. "It'll stop on its own, Hale. I'm serious. Head wounds bleed a lot. It's not as bad as it looks. You've been sitting on this floor for how long?" She didn't answer. "Stand up," he said. "Voss, stand up." He stood first, then offered his hand down to her, palm up, like she was something he was actually willing to wait for. She took it. Not because she needed it, because the room tilted again when she moved, and her knees buckled, and his hand was just there. He didn't take her to a hospital. She'd been expecting a hospital. She'd been building her excuses for the hospital. She fell. She was alone. She'd had a glass of wine and lost her balance. The usual scaffolding. But instead, he put her in the back of a car that smelled like leather and something almost chemical, clean, and she didn't recognize the streets they drove through. "Where are we going?" she said. "Someone will look at it." "I want a hospital." "No, you don't." He wasn't wrong. She didn't want a hospital. She wanted a hospital about as much as she wanted anyone to look too closely at anything in her life right now, but she didn't like that he knew that. "If this is some kind of mob doctor situation," she said. "Don't use that word." "Which word?" "You know which word." She leaned her head back against the seat. The car was moving smoothly, no traffic at this hour, the city lights sliding past in long streaks. She felt strange. Not bad strange, just the particular strangeness of being taken somewhere by someone who hadn't asked her first, and not hating it as much as she should. "How did you know?" she said. He didn't answer for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to. Then, "You didn't send the Thursday report." She turned her head. "What?" "The Thursday reconciliation report. You send it by 7. You didn't send it." She stared at him. "You came to my apartment because I missed a report. I came to your apartment because you've sent that report every Thursday for 2 years and 4 months without missing it once. Including the Thursday your car broke down in a snowstorm. Including the Thursday your landlord shut off the heat and you were working in a coat." He paused. "You don't miss things, Hale." She looked out the window. "I was going to send it late," she said, which was a lie, because she hadn't been going to send it at all. She'd been sitting on the bathroom floor, and the thought of the laptop had felt very far away. "I know," he said. She didn't ask him what he meant by that. She was too tired to ask him what he meant by anything. The place they went to wasn't a hospital, and it wasn't a basement. And it wasn't what she'd imagined when she'd said mob doctor as a joke that wasn't quite a joke. It was a clean room in a building she didn't recognize, and a woman with grey-streaked hair and the kind of stillness that meant she'd seen worse than Maren's head and hadn't flinched. The woman's name was Petra. She said it once, briefly the way people said names when they didn't expect you to need it again. Voss waited outside the door. Maren sat on the table and let Petra work, and tried not to think about the fact that she could hear him through the door, not words, just presence, the occasional shift of his weight, the sound of him staying. "How do you know him?" Maren said. "Old arrangement," Petra said. Clipped. Professional. She tied off the last stitch and stepped back. "3 sutures. You'll have a headache tomorrow." "Already do." "Worse tomorrow." She handed Maren a small bottle. 2 of these if it gets bad. Not more than 2. "What happened to the door?" Maren said. She watched Petra's face. Petra looked at her for a moment. Not unkindly. "Whatever you need it to be," she said. It was after 1 in the morning when they left. The car took them back toward her neighborhood, and Maren sat with her arms folded and the small bottle of pills in her jacket pocket and tried to figure out what she owed him for this. That was how she thought, in debts and credits. She'd learned it young. Everything had a cost. Everything had a column it belonged in. "This was going to be expensive. I'll pay for," she started. "Don't," he said. "Voss, it's not a favor, Hale. Don't make it one." She looked at him. He was looking forward at the street, at the back of his driver's head. His profile in the dark was the same as it always was, closed off, precise. "Then what is it?" she said. He took a moment. "You're valuable. I protect valuable things." She should have hated that. She should have felt the reduction of it. Valuable, like a piece of equipment, like a line item on a balance sheet. She'd spent her whole life being treated like something less than human by people who were supposed to love her. And here was a man who didn't love her, who just said the most transactional thing possible, and somehow it landed differently than it should have. Because he'd come. He'd noticed. He'd measured her absence in a missed report and gotten in his car before 10 o'clock and knocked on a door in a building he had no reason to visit. Nobody had ever come before. Not once. She didn't say any of that. She looked out the window and said, "Your terminology needs work." And he made a sound that might have been almost something. He insisted on coming up. She didn't fight it. The stairs made her head swim and she held the railing and didn't tell him. But she felt him stay close, not touching, just close, the way you'd shadow something you were worried about dropping. Inside the apartment, she stood in the middle of her kitchen and looked at the cold noodles on the stove and thought that she was very tired and very hungry, and she didn't want him to see either of those things. "Sit," he said. "I'm fine. You have 3 stitches in your head and you've been on a bathroom floor for God knows how long. Sit down, Hale." She sat. He looked at the noodles. He looked at her kitchen, which was small and clean, because she was always clean, but also had the particular emptiness of a space where someone was surviving rather than living. The cabinet above the stove where the door didn't close all the way. The single mug on the counter. The list on the refrigerator written in her handwriting, columns of numbers, a habit she couldn't quit even at home. He didn't comment on any of it. He put the noodles on the burner and turned the heat to low. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know." She watched him. He moved through her kitchen like he'd been in small kitchens before, which surprised her. She'd always imagined his life in wide rooms, high ceilings, space that cost more per square foot than she made in a month. But there was nothing awkward about the way he opened the cabinet to find a bowl, nothing fumbling about finding a spoon. "How did you get in?" she said. "Earlier, I didn't give you a key." "No," he said. "Did you have someone?" "Yes. You had someone make a copy of my key, months ago." He didn't sound apologetic. He said it the way he said everything, like a fact, like a thing that existed and had existed for a while, and he saw no reason to pretend otherwise. She should have been angry. She sat there waiting to be angry, testing the feeling, and found something more complicated underneath it. Not gratitude exactly. Not anger either. Something that lived in the space between. "That's not legal," she said. "A lot of things aren't legal, Hale. You know this better than most people I employ." She pressed her mouth together. He put the bowl in front of her, sat down across the table, her table, which had exactly 2 chairs and usually held her work files and nothing else. He folded his hands and looked at her with those flat, careful eyes. "Tell me who it was," he said. She ate a bite of noodles. They were too salty and not quite warm enough, and they were the best thing she'd eaten in 3 days. "You're going to do something about it," she said. "Yes, I don't want that. Tell me why." She set down the spoon. She looked at him. Really looked. Past the surface of him, past the coat and the money and the particular stillness that he carried everywhere like a second skin. "Because then I owe you something I can't put in a column, and I don't like debts I can't see." He was quiet for a moment. "You think everything is a transaction," he said. "Everything is a transaction. You just said I was valuable. That's a transaction." "I said it wrong." She blinked. Voss looked at his folded hands. This, she realized, was unusual. Him looking away from her. Him looking at anything other than what he intended to look at. "I said it the way I say things when I'm not thinking about how they sound. That's different from meaning it that way. Then how did you mean it?" He looked up. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the city made its low-level noise, traffic and somewhere a dog, and somewhere farther away a siren going the other direction. "You didn't send the report," he said, "and I noticed the way you notice when something's wrong with a number. Not because it's late. Because it's wrong." She held very still. "You've been off for 6 weeks," he said. Subtle. Still accurate. Still on time. But off. I didn't say anything because it wasn't my place to say anything. But I noticed. She didn't know what to do with that. She'd spent 6 weeks thinking she was invisible. Thinking she was carrying it alone. Thinking no one was close enough or paying enough attention. and here was the most closed-off man she'd ever met telling her he'd been watching the quality of her silence. "You should have said something," she said, and her voice came out differently than she intended. "You would have said you were fine." She opened her mouth, closed it. "You would have said you were fine," he said again. "You say you're fine. You said it on the bathroom floor with blood on your hands." She looked down at her hands. Clean now. Petra had given her something to clean up with, and she'd done it carefully, the way she did everything. But she could still feel the memory of it. "He's an ex," she said. "Before you ask. He's not, it's complicated. He doesn't have money. He's not going to be a problem for you. He's already a problem. Voss, not because he touched something of mine, his voice was even, measured because he hurt someone who had done nothing to deserve it. That's its own category. That's not about you being useful to me." She looked at him. "Stop looking at me like that," he said. "Like what? Like I said something that surprised you. You did say something that surprised me." He stood up, picked up her bowl and put it in the sink and turned on the water, which she found inexplicably unbearable to watch. This large, dangerous, remote man with his hands under her faucet in her small kitchen. "I'll have someone outside tonight," he said. "You won't see them. I told you I don't want." "I know what you want." He turned off the water, turned around. He was looking at her the way he looked at columns that didn't balance, like something needed to be corrected, like he had identified the error and was deciding how to approach it. What you want and what's going to happen aren't always the same thing, Hale. You know that too. She stood up. She was steadier now. The noodles had helped. The pills Petra had given her had helped. Or maybe just the sitting down had helped. She didn't know. She was steady enough to walk to her door and open it and look at him with something she hoped read as composure. "Thank you," she said, "for coming, Petra, for the rest of it. I'll find a way to put it somewhere. You don't have to put it anywhere." "I do. I always do." He walked to the door. He was very close now. He had to be, in her narrow hallway, and he stopped and looked at her, and for a moment she had no idea what he was going to say. "You've been managing your own columns for a long time," he said. "Every shortfall, every gap. You've been figuring out how to make it balance by yourself." "Yes," she said. "You don't have to do that tonight." She felt something crack, just slightly. Somewhere behind her sternum. Not breaking, just a hairline fracture, the kind you didn't know you had until something pressed on it. "What does that mean?" she said quietly. "It means I'm going to find him," Voss said. "And you're going to sleep. And tomorrow you're going to come into the office, and the Thursday report is going to be on my desk by 7 because you're going to be fine. But tonight you don't have to balance anything." He paused. "Let tonight be a loss. You're allowed." She stood with her hand on the door and her throat tight, and 3 stitches in her head, and $43 in her checking account. And she thought about the 15 years she'd spent making the math work, making the shortfalls disappear, making everything look better than it was. She thought about the way he'd noticed. Not when she asked him to, not when she told him, but when she was 6 weeks of silent and had said nothing. "You're going to be insufferable about this," she said. Something shifted in his expression, so small she would have missed it a year ago. "Probably," he said. She almost smiled. The motion pulled at the stitches and she stopped herself, but he saw it anyway. She could tell by the way he exhaled, slow, like something releasing. "Lock the door," he said. "Both locks. I know how to lock a door, Voss. I know you do." He walked out. She stood in the opening and watched him go down the hall, watched the particular way he moved, contained and deliberate, and somehow different than he'd been 2 hours ago, though she couldn't have said exactly how. She locked both locks. She stood in her kitchen and looked at the bowl in the sink, and the cold stove and the list on the refrigerator, all those columns in her handwriting, and she thought about what he'd said. Let tonight be a loss. She sat down at the table. She didn't open her laptop. She didn't check her phone. She just sat there in her quiet apartment with the city noise coming through the walls, and her heart doing something irregular that she didn't have a category for yet. She thought, he noticed. She thought, he came. She thought, I don't know what to do with someone who comes. Outside, somewhere on the street, A car engine idled and didn't move. She knew without looking that it was his. She knew he'd stay there until he decided she was safe, and he'd leave before she woke up, and Monday she'd walk into the office and he'd look at her the way he always looked at her, flat, careful, giving nothing away. And they'd talk about the reconciliation reports and the quarter-end projections, and neither of them would say anything about tonight. But she'd know. And he'd know she knew. And maybe that was the beginning of something she didn't have a name for yet. The kind of thing that didn't fit in any column she'd ever kept. The kind of thing that just sat there on the balance sheet of her life, neither debt nor credit, waiting for her to figure out what it was. She was good at figuring out numbers. She'd always been good at that. She thought she might be patient enough to figure this one out too.